Welcome to Philly Prime. I'm Dave Schratweiser, and unfortunately, another bad topic this week to cover. Mass shootings in the United States. Tulsa, Oklahoma. On Wednesday night, 4 people dead. The gunman killed himself. In Texas, the school massacre. 19 children and 2 teachers died. And a few weeks ago in Buffalo, 10 people died at a supermarket, gunned down by a crazed gunman. So joining me this week, and you've seen him on the show, unfortunately, this time around, it's not a positive topic at all, is a good friend of mine, former Deputy Police Commissioner in Philadelphia, Joe Sullivan, counterterrorism expert, Homeland Security. He's kind of done it all in his 30-plus years in the Philadelphia Police Department, now retired. Joe, thanks for coming on the show. Again, I apologize. It's not a pleasant topic to talk about, but an important one. So let's start off with just kind of your reaction to what's gone on here in the last month with these 3 major shootings.
Well, I mean, if you look at the statistics, in 2021 saw a 50% increase in active shooters. And if you take that back to 2017, the increase is 100%.
Yeah.
And so far in 2022, we're outpacing 2021. So this is a problem that's not going to go away. It's going to continue. These things feed on one another. I have no doubt that the attention from the horrific incidents in Buffalo and Uvalde may have well brought this individual yesterday to commit another horrific act. And we're seeing the problems in law enforcement, the problems with the mental health system, the problems with the availability of high-powered weapons like the AR-15. And there is no one solution, and I think that's the biggest, the most frustrating part for me. They got people on one side, and they just want to say it's the guns and move on, and then you have other people to say it has nothing to do with the guns. Well, it has to do with a whole spectrum of things, and if we don't approach the problem from a holistic standpoint, and we try to address them all, it's just like when you set up security for a major event. You have concentric rings of security, overlapping rings, just for that purpose, because there's no one solution to any complicated problem. But we better get on it, because we saw some significant problems in the response to Uvalde, and there's also the issue of Buffalo and Uvalde could have been prevented if we didn't simply require you to be 21 years old to buy a semi-automatic rifle, and there were failures in terms of no one picked up on social media. They were cries for help. They were, subconscious or conscious cries for someone, please intervene. And then the fact that the doer from Buffalo was taken to a mental health facility for threatening to commit a mass shooting and simply released. We need to fix things in the criminal justice system. And there's no 2 ways about it. But we also have to start holding other people accountable.
Yeah.
Why was he released so quickly after making such a dangerous threat? Why was it downplayed? Why was he not entered into the red flag system? Why wasn't the red flag law adhered to, and he was flagged from purchasing a gun? Again, there's all these tripwires that were missed, and in every one of these incidents that I've studied, there were multiple opportunities for someone that have said, "Hey, something's wrong here. You guys need to look at this." And we got to make sure that when those calls come in to law enforcement, that, as I used to say, that's it. It's all hands on deck. No one goes home until we have hands on this person and we can say for sure that they're not a threat, or we have control of the firearms.
Yeah, you talked about numbers at the beginning. The Associated Press just moved the story about an hour ago. 12 mass shootings since January, 76 people dead. Including Tulsa, Oklahoma last night, where a man walked into a medical center on hospital grounds with a rifle and with a gun. According to the police, he used both. 4 people were shot and killed, and then he took his own life. We have the horrific situation in Uvalde. The funerals have started this week for both the 19 children that have been killed and the 2 teachers that were killed. And the Buffalo situation, obviously, about a month ago with 10 dead. Joe, let's take a quick look at Salvador Rolando Ramos. He's the gunman in the Texas incident, who, according to police, bought an AR-15 the day after his birthday, then bought another high-powered long gun, also had a handgun with him as well, 1,400 rounds. I think they said it was 5.56 ammo he bought. I saw something on TV the other night. To purchase that required thousands of dollars. I think the one gun they said he paid over $2,200 for. He's 18 years old. He works at a drive-up window at a fast food place. Do you start there to figure out how did this happen and why did it happen?
I mean, absolutely. I think that's the question on everybody's mind. But we also know the credit card companies target young people. Mm-hmm. I know all of my children were receiving offers for to sign up for a credit card at what I thought was outrageous level credit lines. So that may be what happened here. Mm-hmm. But we certainly have to find out to confirm that he acted alone. But the other thing I'm going to say to you is, and I think this should definitely be the last time today that we say this person's name or the name of any of these shooters. Mm. One of the things that we have to stop doing is the media and law enforcement. We just have to agree to stop mentioning their names, stop showing their pictures. Because one of the things that the research does show is that new shooters often respond to the level of attention that they see previous shooters getting. Yeah. And they, the Buffalo attack was modeled much after the Aurora attack. So one thing we want to make sure we do is deny them as much attention as possible. Yeah.
Now, I will say, though, before we go away from him, according to his friends, family members, and things like that, this young man had a stuttering problem. He had a lisp. He was bullied routinely coming up through school, things like that. It appears there were some signs here that this young man needed help early and didn't get it. And unfortunately, why he picked an elementary school to do this at and act the way he did, shoot his own grandmother, just kind of belies everything and makes you wonder what's going on in this country.
Yeah, one of the things we have to do is we have to teach our own children who we're not going to keep them off of the internet. But when you're in chat rooms and someone is talking about people deserve to be raped and someone is nicknamed school shooter and he's obviously proud of it, I mean, we have to teach our young people, you got to take this seriously. You got to understand how this can end, and you've got to reach out and make someone aware of it. And also, these platforms have to be held responsible. They have to have some type of algorithm in place. I mean, it's possible where they pick up on keywords, terms, phrases, and report and cooperate with law enforcement. And it's just not normal to go onto a website at that age and brag about buying a gun, threaten to rape, murder, and kidnap, and nobody responds. Or in reference to the Buffalo shooter, you're posting your manifesto and you're talking about making racist comments and your hatred for another race and your willingness to commit violence, and no one calls law enforcement. It's just like I said, it's no one thing. There were so many ways in which that Buffalo shooting could have been prevented through Uvalde. But the one thing we do when we're investing money in this problem is the availability of mental health treatment. I know so many different friends of mine who have family members, and they'll tell you that it's just almost impossible to get that type of help. And insurances often don't cover it. Right. It's extremely expensive, and there simply are not enough inpatient beds available in this country.
Yeah, sometimes doctors won't take insurance. They want to be paid directly, kind of situation. I guess there's a lot of hassles involved with that. And you're right, that seems to be one of you mentioned at the top. This is a multifaceted problem, and a lot of things have to be addressed, including the mental health part of this. Let's talk about, if we can, the situation at Robb Elementary School. According to all the articles I've seen and the news conferences I've watched, they had a 21-point security plan at that school, including a fence, all locked doors, single-point entry that was supposed to be in place, a whole lot of other things. There had been a active shooter training in the district a few weeks before that at the high school. Everyone in the police department, which I understand is made up of a chief, a detective, and 2 police officers, I believe for 8 schools, 4 police officers, obviously not enough in this situation. Lockdown situations, things like that. When the grandmother was shot a few miles away, there was no lockdown declared, so the school was not on lockdown at the time. The gunman crashed his car, left his car, fired on a funeral home, jumped the fence into the schoolyard and started firing. Let's deal with one thing right off the bat. Where did this story come from, and how could it even start that a school resource officer engaged the gunman in gunfire and was wounded or pinned down when he wasn't even there? Where did that come from? That misinformation right off the bat really spun this whole thing sideways for law enforcement.
Yeah, I'm thinking that got confused, and that's why you should never speak to the press until you're 100% ready, and that you've utilized the incident command system to designate your press person, and all of the agencies involved have contributed to the statement and confirmed the facts. There's never a problem with saying I don't know in that initial press conference, but I will get you that answer.
Yeah.
And I've given you that answer many times. So I'm thinking that when the first 2 officers entered the school, the gunman did fire through the door or window, and they were struck with shrapnel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking that, but it doesn't excuse it. You can't afford to make mistakes like that in a situation. I think as well, they were probably realizing the depth of passion of the parents who were not happy with the delay in getting into that classroom.
Yeah, well, you saw that on video. The parents were outside yelling, "Go in, go in, go in." Speaking of going in, the initial report comes out that a teacher had propped open the door to go out to the parking lot to get her cell phone out of her car and then returned in. The initial report was that she left the door propped open. Apparently, based on video they now recovered, that is not true. She did close the door, but the door did not lock. And unfortunately, that's a key at a school, to have all the perimeter doors locked and one point of entry. Am I right? They call it a man trap sometimes, where you have to come in through the first door. You stand in like a vestibule with a second door. The back door has to close. Someone inside has to ask you to identify yourself. We had it at Fox when I worked at Fox. And bulletproof glass there as well. And the person stands in there until a security person clears them to come in. Had that happened here, obviously this would have all been prevented, but it did not.
And that's 100% true. And I'm all for target hardening our schools. But remember, there's over 100,000, some number like that in the United States. Many of them, like in Philadelphia, these buildings are 60, 70 years old. So the amount of time and money it's going to take. But remember, and this is why it's so important to attack it from multiple levels. If you have an individual that is determined that he's going to shoot up a school and the students in that school, if he or she realizes they can't get into the school, I mean, what are we going to no longer have recess? Mm-hmm. There's always going to be arrival. There's always going to be departure. There's always going to be, is every window in the school going to be bulletproof? So I'm 100% in agreement that we need to do that. But again, our time and energy has to really be spent into prevention, into having the research done, so we can begin to create profiles, begin to identify those types of behaviors of what causes a person to transition from a normal, young, healthy person into someone that angry that they would do something so horrific and callous as that. In regards to the training, I saw that training myself, and the first thing I want to know is who gave the training. There's unfortunately a lot of consultants that are out there giving training that have no real life experience. They're not prepared to do something like that. They got an online certificate. I don't know if that's what happened in this case. The second thing I want to know is if the school police were doing that training, were the city police there? Were the county sheriff's department there? If they're training alone, I mean, that would be ridiculous, because what's confusing here is that it just doesn't appear that these agencies were used to working together. And I want to know where the Uvalde City SWAT team was. I mean, they're very proud of their SWAT team. In 2018, they got level 4 vests. Yes. And all of that equipment. I want to know what equipment was in the cars of the school police and the city police. What kind of active shooter kits do they have? It's something all departments need to be looking at right now. And making sure that, along with the plate carriers and the helmets and the long guns, that you have breaching tools, and can sit. Now, the issue with the body bunker is a little bit complicated. I mean, they're a great tool, and I'm all for them, but they require a lot of training. They're extremely heavy. You need to be in shape. You need to train with them. Once you're carrying the body bunker, you now have to use a handgun. And officers in SWAT train how to load and reload and charge their weapon, utilizing their sights and the side of the body bunker. But it also is heavy and it slows you down. So certainly part of this analysis and this investigation will be the training and the type of training and what it included. Do they have memos of understanding between the different agencies? But listen, I don't understand how the chief of a 4-man or 5-man police department would be the incident commander.
Yeah, that was my next question. You've been the incident commander at many a catastrophe, including the Amtrak train crash at the beginning and others, countless, the Republican National Convention, Democratic National Convention, things like that. Should the head of a 4-man police department be calling the shots? Excuse the pun there, but should they be directing individuals when you have deputies, Texas Rangers, the border police showed up, border patrol showed up at some point, but you have 19 police officers, I believe they said, in the hallway outside the classroom. It sounds like looking for direction, and the direction they got, according again to the preliminary information, and everybody has their right to tell the story, including the chief himself. Why did they decide this was no longer an active shooting situation and it was a hostage situation when that clearly wasn't the case? Young children are calling from the classroom to 911. I'm assuming, and again, based on preliminary info, was that info sent to the 19 officers inside and the incident commander that kids are calling from inside the classroom saying he's still in here, we're still in here, we're still alive? I mean, that tells me you go in.
Yeah. Yeah. What I want to know from the beginning, because we've seen this in other incidents, including incidents in Philadelphia, when that chief made that call, where was he? Was he in his office? Because if he was in his office, he was wrong. It's the highest ranking officer at the scene that makes that call. And officers are trained to immediately go in. Now, again, we had 2 officers that were hit with shrapnel from gunfire. It may be reasonable for them to say they needed more officers. But shortly thereafter, a sergeant arrived, I don't know, from the city or the school department with more officers. That was his or her responsibility then to reorganize, regroup, and come up with a quick tactical plan. Mm-hmm. You've got the ability to use diversion, the ability to use multiple points of entry. You've got fire and EMS on location because they responded to the initial auto accident. So you've got tools on scene that you need. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is you got to come up with a plan. You got to come up with it quickly, and you have to act. You've got trauma surgeons talk about the golden hour. There's babies in there, they're bleeding, and their time is running out. I got calls coming in at 12:03, 12:10, 12:19, 12:21, 12:36, and then there's an open phone from 12:47 to 12:51 with children begging, please come and help us. And I can't even imagine what they must have been feeling when they were making that plea and no one's coming. Yeah. They're smearing themselves with blood. They're laying on top of their dead classmates. I mean, I just can't even begin to imagine being that age and dealing with this. So, all those questions have to be answered. And I think, and I suspect that chief was sworn in yesterday as a member of city council. Mm-hmm. And he was an influential person in the community. And maybe other police leaders were hesitant, because what should have happened in a situation like this, part of the incident command system, it's the most knowledgeable and capable person that takes charge. And when he made that statement that this is a hostage situation, then someone should have immediately took over and said, I'm establishing supremacy here, and this, whether it be the city or the county. Where was the city SWAT team? Where was the sheriff's department SWAT team? I saw a picture of a state police officer. He's wearing a helmet and NVGs, night vision goggles, and carrying a flashbang. Great. I mean, but it was obvious that there wasn't a sufficient command post in place where you had representatives of each agency there telling the chief, this is what I have on scene. I'm told there were marshals on scene.
Yeah.
If there were marshals on scene, they had a body bunker. I mean, this Borak team, they get on location at 12:15. I mean, they're coming a great distance.
Yeah.
They're ready to go. And try to understand.
And that's 45 minutes. That's 45 minutes after this jumps off at 11:30, 11:28.
Right. And it's almost another 45 minutes before they're allowed to finally go in. So, and let's remember something about our federal partners. At this point, initially, I mean, you really don't have federal jurisdiction. Your partners show up to help you. They're there to provide you with whatever you need, and that's what they were there to do. And they were ready to go. But they're not going to overrule someone. They're there to tell you, hey, this is the capabilities we have, and we're ready to go and get it done for you. And they should have been allowed to do it.
Yeah.
But where were the city, county, and state resources, and why were they not put into play?
Yeah. And you kind of wonder, like you said, why was that the head of the county sheriffs, the deputies, there were Texas Rangers on site. And let's talk about them for a minute, Joe. They sound like they're going to do the investigation here. They are doing the investigation here. They are trying to talk to all the witnesses. This is going to be a lengthy, fact-driven kind of investigation. I know people are going to get impatient about wanting to know what happened here, but based on the stumbling that took place at the beginning on facts that just weren't true coming out and then had to be countered and then had to be discussed again, you want a complete, thorough investigation here from the second this started, do you not?
You do. And I think at this point, I think it's even hard for DPS to do that. They lost a lot of credibility when their, I believe it was a lieutenant, made a statement that the officers didn't go in because they might have got shot. That was really another example of, only one person should be talking to the media when you have an incident like this. It's one person. But every agency's PIO has a chance to contribute to and review the statement before it's made. And that clearly was not being done here. And I think that it's good that DOJ is going to come in and do the review. And yes, it's going to take a while. I mean, they have, they have to listen to all the radio transmissions. And that's another issue that apparently was not part of their planning process. Was the interoperability issue that it was stated that everyone was on different radio frequencies, and then there was a report that the chief in charge wasn't even listening to a radio. Now look, that may be fine. That his style might be. I want to focus on the big picture items. I want to maintain the 10,000-foot view, but you better have designated someone to stand next to you and relay those radio transmissions. And when you are having a child call and say, there's 8 or 9 children alive in this classroom, it's go time. It's just that simple. It's go time. So, I just, my heart bleeds for these parents to know that, it's I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to lose your child, number one. But if you have to live with the reality that it's possible they could have lived if they had gotten medical attention faster, and that's why, in Philadelphia, I entered tactical emergency casualty care to part of our active shooter response. And incredible number of lives are saved every year by the Philadelphia Police Department in normal everyday response. A
simple tourniquet. You put tourniquet kits in, advocated for that, and the police department did that. That could save somebody's life. Shot in the leg. You get shot in the leg, you don't think it's going to kill you. It can. So you need a tourniquet kit for everybody.
And every time we applied a tourniquet, EMS would go to that hospital and speak to the fire department for us, and the doctor would tell us what was it appropriate to apply the tourniquet, and was it appropriately applied. So for positive reasons, so we would get that feedback back to the officer. Wasn't tight enough. If it doesn't hurt, it ain't tight enough. We had a gentleman fall off his roof doing work on his house, and he got a compound fracture of his thigh bone and penetrating fracture, and officers used tourniquets. So, it was tourniquets, gunshot kits, the chest seals, the basics, airways. So that needs to be happening immediately. And, we have to get and that's why I also started the RAMS program, where we began to train with our fire department. We trained our fire department medics and then trained with them. When we would do training scenarios at the airport, so that all the law enforcement agencies at the airport would train with us, so they understood how we stacked our formations, our verbal orders, how we would move. We went to the Comcast building. We invited SEP to be a part of it. We worked with security from inside the building. We did things at Independence Mall to work with our federal partners. You've got to train together. You got to train frequently. The infamous Lieutenant Fitzpatrick. I mean, he put together Edge 1 and Edge 2. I mean, really revolutionary stuff at the time where, we were training on an actual train car, along with the SEPTA police and the fire department and Sam Phillips from the Office of Emergency Management, who made all that possible by finding us the money. But the lessons learned from that is just,
Okay. Before we get away from what happened, given that this is a split-second decision-making situation, it's obviously chaotic at the school when they arrive. But 19 officers went into the school. Walk people through in an active shooter situation in a simple way, so it's direct. What's the goal going in the school at that point when you have an active shooter? You're hearing gunfire. People have been shot. What are you doing when you enter the doors? What's the goal, and how do you get to it?
You pick the most capable person that you have there at the moment. It might be an officer with military experience, and you designate him as the team leader. You don't wait for a supervisor unless one's there. And even if there is a supervisor there, I mean, you got a guy that's a former Ranger or something. He's going to be the team leader, and you're going to move in. It might be by yourself. It might be with one partner. It might be with three. It might be with four. Either way, you arrive, in you go, and you move to the sound of gunshots. There's no high tech. There's no time for high technology here. You move to the sound of gunshots. You walk over the injured. It's a terrible thing to say, I know, but you cannot change the fact that they've been shot. But one thing you can do is move to the sound of gunfire, neutralize the threat, and keep someone else from being shot. And then you immediately transition into your rescue mode, and you go back and you start, as you said, doing hemorrhage control, applying tourniquets and gunshot kits and pressure bandages, chest seals, airways, and roll. And you start bringing the medics in at that point. You go into what's called a warm zone. You haven't had a chance to completely search the building yet. There could be other persons inside that represent a danger, but the gunshots have stopped. So in Philadelphia, the officers are trained how to protect the medics while they do the basics and evacuate the person to a triage area where they can do advanced life support at that time. And then, you amass your resources and you do a secondary and tertiary search of the property to make sure that there are no other victims. In fact, in Tulsa, they actually found an additional victim that was hiding in a closet. And that's why that is so important to make sure, because it takes a long time to account for everyone. Yeah. When you have an incident like this, you have people that are just leaving the scene, walking away. Amtrak was a prime example. That was the most difficult task, was simply accounting for it. Some people just got in a cab and went back to New York City or went to the hospital on their own. So, but that's why it requires the strict adherence to the incident command system. The Bisco is a perfect example in Philadelphia. I lived nearby, which was fortunate for me, but still, I'm barbecuing when I get the call, and I'm in my car immediately and on the way. But still, the important thing that day was officers from the 7th, the 8th, traffic on the Roosevelt Boulevard, even some officers from Ben Salem responded into Nabisco. They chased the perpetrator into a building that was actually on the factory floor. And at that time, it did become a barricaded person, and they correctly handled it as so. And then when we relieved them on post, I got a phone call telling me that there was a room inside this structure in which we had more victims. Immediately, I gave my operators the order to go and to take the person out. She elected to show her hands and surrender, and of course we took that, and then we rescued the people that were inside. So things can change, but a prime example, there was criticism of the officers from Buffalo that they didn't shoot the individual when they should be commended. They responded in a couple of minutes at best. They had soft body armor and handguns. They confront a guy with hard body armor and long guns. And their goal was to make sure he did not go back inside that supermarket because there were more potential victims in there. You don't have control over the way these things end. And Nabisco, again, is a prime example.
And I got to say this, there's been a lot of criticism of law enforcement in Uvalde. There were some very brave officers who went to classrooms around that school, broke out windows, and got children out of that building through those broken windows and quickly escorted them off the property. I mean, I saw some video yesterday, because more and more video is coming out as this goes on, of officers at windows where you're vulnerable, getting kids out as quickly as they can and moving them in the direction away from the school as quickly as possible. So there was a lot of kind of heroic police officers doing their job there, getting as many people out of that building and to safety that they could. There's been a lot of criticism of them, but at the same point, that's a very important thing, to get as many people out of the building as you can safely.
That's why and I don't even want to say it's criticism, but my hard questions have been for the people in charge. My heart bleeds for the officers. Right now, I'm sure all the officers that responded to that are heartbroken and they're really questioning everything. But when an incident like that unfolds, you're trained to follow orders, and the officers followed the orders they were given. So the question is, why were those orders given? Who gave them? And why were they not superseded by other people in authority? And this city will never be the same. A small community.
No. Let's travel to Washington, D.C. for a minute if we can here. There's a lot of talks going on. I think there's a group of about 6 U.S. senators now that are from both sides, bipartisan group, talking about different things that can be done. Since the beginning of the week, there's talk about an AR-15 ban. There's talk about assault weapon bans. The president, for some reason, went off about 9mm handguns the other day, sounding like he wanted to ban them. Things like that. Hardening of schools, security around. That's a lot of money. We have money. We're tossing around billions of dollars here left and right in this country right now. A lot of parents sitting at home saying, toss some that way, and let's do that. But as you spoke about this right at the very beginning, this is a multifaceted thing, and not one thing could stop that. I believe I saw the other night that 18-year-olds have been able to buy a long rifle, a long gun in Texas for the past century. And that was nothing new. But would it have even stopped him? There was no criminal record on this individual. There was no, mental health issues that popped up that would have prevented him from getting the guns. And he got the guns, and he got a lot of ammunition. To me, and this is just me, but I'm an East Coast guy. I don't live in Texas. If a young man shows up a day after his birthday buying 2 weapons like that and a ton of ammo like that, something's going off in my head. In the times we're in, especially with Buffalo having just happened. And I'm saying, when the guy walks away or before he walks away to my boss, this kid's buying a lot of ammo here, and he's buying long guns, and he literally just had his 18th birthday. Those are simple questions. See something, say something type things. Isn't it?
I mean, I think so. The problem is, it's kind of a different, it's a different environment in Texas. I don't know. Yeah. I would think that to be unusual, but can that person even refuse to sell if the person passes the background check? I don't know. That's just it. And if that person did, is there something in the law that would protect him from liability if someone wants to come back later and then, and sue or file a claim that he failed to do that? I mean, the same thing goes with mental health. We got to make sure that if a mental health practitioner puts someone in the system to ban them from purchasing a firearm, that they have the immunity they need to feel confident in doing that, or if they hold someone for inpatient treatment, that they're protected from liability, that they have a degree of immunity, so that they're not afraid to do their job. We talk about 18-year-olds and the need for diversion when they commit crimes. And one of the explanations given is that 18-year-olds, especially males, their brains don't, fully develop and mature until they're older than 21, sometimes as long as 25. So I don't understand why either one of these shooters could not buy a handgun, but they're allowed to buy a 223 or a 5.56, and as you said, hundreds of rounds of ammunition. There's nothing preventing them from buying body armor. So getting to your original question is, the president's comments disturbed me greatly because that's exactly what the gun lobby wants him to say. You can't stop a law-abiding citizen from purchasing a firearm, but I think that's unreasonable. But I don't think it's unreasonable to require you to be 21 and pass a background check, and the private sale or private transfer exception. Mm-hmm. And for everyone to go through a background check before buying a weapon. Yeah. I went through background checks before I bought my long gun and my handguns. I didn't find it a problem. It was quick. I presented the proper identification, filled out the required forms. We also have to give ATF back their power. There's no reason why ATF should not be able to.
Well, they should give them some money to do their job first. Because a couple of months ago, Jeff Cole reported in Philadelphia that the ATF office here has $1 million budget. I mean, if that's true, that's ridiculous. Let's talk about background checks. I'm sure you saw Steve Kerr. He's the coach of the Golden State Warriors. The day of the shooting, talking about background checks in a very emotional way, angry actually, stood up and kind of walked off the set after he spoke at a pregame press conference. There's been talk about a red flag legislation, things like that, which would, if something popped up in the mental health field or whatever, you could go and remove guns from individuals who may potentially pose a danger. That's a whole gray area that have to be defined, that kind of thing. But in domestic violence situations, if police officers respond to a domestic violence situation, they often take any kind of weapons out of the house that might be in there after they've been called there for a domestic violence situation. So do you think those kind of things will help, and should we do them?
I think we should, and they will help. Are they alone the solution?
No.
Absolutely not. In those states that have instituted red flag laws, the preliminary research indicates that they have reduced domestic incidents of homicide and aggravated assault and suicide. Because let's remember, gun deaths in the United States, the biggest classification of gun deaths in the United States are suicide. Yes. And we do know. And again, I'm a gun owner. I'm not anti-gun. But you have to understand that the responsibility that you are taking on when you introduce a gun into a household, the research is clear. The chance for domestic violence, the chance for suicide goes up exponentially. And one of the things that frustrates me as a gun owner is legal gun owners who are just irresponsible. We just had a 4-year-old shoot himself in a car. He was left in a car with a loaded gun while the father was getting a haircut. I mean, that's not an isolated incident. I mean, when you look at how many of those stories happen here in Philadelphia, now extrapolated across the entire country. Every major city in America right now, and not just major cities, smaller cities too, are seeing a rise in stolen guns, especially out of vehicles. Yeah. The number of guns being produced and imported into America in the last 2 years has gone through the roof. I think last year we imported 6.8 million weapons into the United States. That number was 700,000 back in 1986. Yeah. Gun sales, they jumped from 1 million guns a year to 2 million gun sales. So, I mean, it's just, and I'm not saying that anyone should not be able, any law-abiding citizen should not be able to buy a gun, but that's why we need to be reasonable. So I don't like the president talking about 9mm, but I like the idea that a lot of gun owners and a lot of people that attended the NRA convention in Houston, and indicated that, hey, that's worth taking a look at, raising the age to 21, and other reasonable measures like that that will not inhibit. If you start talking about you're going to start taking people's guns away from them, this is going to shut down immediately. That's not going to happen unless you have cause. Yeah. And even with red flag laws, if your guns are taken, you get a due process hearing within a very short period of time where law enforcement and mental health have to justify what they've done. But, in the domestic violence laws in Pennsylvania, they require law enforcement to do that. But it's not happening in the city.
Yeah.
Because right now there's not resources to do it. And there's questions about whose responsibility it is to do it and where. And one of the problems with the law is there was an onus put on law enforcement that if there's any damage whatsoever to those firearms, I think we have to pay treble damages.
Yeah.
So, that now it's a matter of where are you going to store them and how are you going to store them.
Okay. Let's finish up with two quick questions. We saw a lot of the parents from the Sandy Hook shooting over 10 years ago go public again in the last week talking about you can't let another one of these go by without doing anything. Congress can't run to their usual four corners and hide from doing something along the lines of the multiple things we've spoken about here today. You can't just sit back and 6 months from now we've done nothing. The time for that is present and needs to happen right away. Would you agree with that? And do you think it's going to happen?
I tend to think it will. But again, that's why I implore people to stop with take everyone's guns away, and people on the other side that say we're not giving in to anything because if we do, it's the slippery slope. I mean, they're talking points, and that's nonsense. We need to come into the middle and really be willing just to take a look at everything objectively and really say to yourself, if you raise the age in which you can buy an AR-15 to 21, how is that really taking any of my rights away? Even in the military, people talk about the military. We give those guns to young people in the military. Oh, yeah, well, in the military, as soon as you're done training, they collect that weapon and they count every bullet. And God help you if you're short a bullet. Yeah. You got problems. Yeah. So that's really not the case. And again, I mean, let's not start talking about 9mm other than to say that when you buy a gun, you should go through a background check. It takes seconds. But now on the other side, we have to make sure that there is money and resources to make sure that these background checks can be done quickly and efficiently. Because
and properly.
I will be first to admit, that's what I experienced, but other gun owners have not experienced that. And that, raises a significant argument. You look at the number of people, what is it? Permits in the city and county of Philadelphia are up, I think, 700% from just a couple of years ago. I mean, that's really disturbing. That tells you that
70,000 permits, I think was the number I heard.
Yeah. And I mean, if you go through the process, you probably have to do more paperwork when you when you adopt an animal from the SPCA or something like that. So, that's not good. I don't want to deny anyone a permit, any lawful citizen a permit, that they have a right to that permit. I agree, but I just want to make sure that I think we should go back to the old system where we get prints, we take photos, we do extensive background checks, and we look at all arrests, not just convictions, all arrests. And we do a little bit more, but the resources to do that do not exist, and that's why we had to go to another system to expedite it because the department was sued and really didn't have a leg to stand on. So, again, I hope all of these issues are looked at so lawful gun owners come to realize that we are not coming after your firearms. We may ask you to do a couple of extra steps so that we can get this problem under control. And the other thing, Dave, is these laws have to be passed at the federal level.
Yes.
New Jersey has some of the most strict gun laws in the country. So does California. But the states, Illinois, but the states that border them have some of the most liberal gun laws in the country. So you're canceling each other out. That's why we have to have standardized laws passed in regards to guns and the purchasing of guns, so that if it's you have to be 21 in one state, you just can't go to another state when you're 18 and buy a gun. So I really pray that there's an objective, reasonable, civil conversation around these things, everybody realizes that we need to make progress. Everyone's not getting all of what they want. Better accept that going in. Just focus on making sure that everybody gets something and we get the process started. We can always build on that because these things are not going to end. Just yesterday, there was an attack that was thwarted in L.A. where an individual was recruiting other individuals to do an attack on a high school, and they had long guns and was ready to go. That was a tragedy averted and a great job. There was a 10-year-old in Florida after Uvalde who was arrested threatening to shoot up his school online.
Yeah.
So, this problem is with us, and we need to put away. We need to stop being stubborn.
Okay. Hey, listen, props in Oklahoma last night. The police response was within 3 minutes. Officers were entering that medical center to go towards the gunman. And the chief on scene last night who held the news conference made a big point of saying we were there within 3 minutes and we went into action immediately. I would assume you want to see, and we'll wrap this up with this, a thorough moment by moment by moment accounting of what happened in Uvalde by the Texas Rangers. The Justice Department is now saying they're investigating as well. This has to be thorough, and these parents and the families deserve answers as to what happened here. And because I'm sure a lot of them believe their children could have been saved if more had been done. Quickly.
Kudos to Tulsa. From the response to the press conference, I don't see how a situation like that could be handled better. And you know what? Everyone in law enforcement, we obviously wish Tulsa never happened, and our hearts break for the families of those lost. But at least it reminded people that this is the way that law enforcement does respond to these things. This is the way that they're trained to respond to these things. Uvalde is not the norm, and but it does raise the issue of when we're training our police officers how to respond to these things. The one thing that we often do not do is we do not run classes for the individuals that should be in charge out there. And I think that's something that will come out of Uvalde to make sure that the decision makers participate in the training with the officers, but they have a separate training in incident command and how to manage these incidents and know the definition between an active shooter and a hostage and barricade situation.
Okay. Joe, listen, thank you for once again letting us tap into your expertise, your skills, and your experience. 30 plus years in the police department at a very high level. Always appreciate your straightforward answers and your straightforward thoughts about what could, should, and has to be done in the future kind of thing. And I appreciate you coming on the show at short notice again here, but this was a topic that just kind of needs to be talked to, especially since we just had another incident in Tulsa last night. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, that's it for this week on Philly Prime, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate that. We'll be back next week with another episode. Please join us.